March 10th, 1974. Deep in the jungle on a remote Philippine island called Lubang, something impossible is about to happen. A young Japanese explorer, 24-year-old Norio Suzuki, stands face to face with a man who, by all logic, shouldn't exist. The man before him is dressed in a tattered military uniform. Khaki fabric faded to an almost colorless gray by decades of sun and rain. Patches sewn with strips of stolen cloth. Buttons replaced with carved wood. His face is a landscape of hardship, deeply weathered, carved by 30 years of tropical sun. His skin is dark, almost leather-like. His hair long and unkempt, streaked with gray. But it's his eyes that Suzuki will remember forever. Sharp, calculating, dangerous. The eyes of a predator. Of a man who has survived by being more careful, more suspicious, more paranoid than any hunter tracking him. In his hands, he holds a rifle, an Arisaka, Type 99, 30 years old, but meticulously maintained. Still functional, still loaded, still pointed at Suzuki's chest. Suzuki swallows hard. His mouth is dry, his heart is pounding. He came to this island looking for adventure, looking for a story. He found a ghost. He speaks carefully, choosing each word like it might be his last. "The war is over," he says quietly. "It's been over for 30 years. The soldier stares at him, unblinking, silent. And then, slowly, his lips curl into something that might be a smile. He laughs, not with joy, not with relief, with disbelief, with contempt, with a bitterness so deep it's almost palpable. "Prove it," the soldier says. His voice is rough, gravelly, unused to conversation. The voice of a man who has spoken to no one for years. "Bring me my commanding officer. Let him order me to surrender." This is the story of that man. His name is Hiroo Onoda, a Japanese Imperial Army intelligence officer who refused to believe World War II had ended, who fought alone in the Philippine jungle for 29 years, who killed 30 people in defense of an island that no longer needed defending, who became a legend, a myth, a ghost story whispered around campfires, who became the last soldier of World War II. This is his story. Welcome to a story that sounds impossible. A story so strange, so unbelievable, so utterly bizarre that if it were fiction, editors would reject it as unrealistic. No one would believe this, they'd say, and they'd be right to be skeptical. But every word you're about to hear, every detail, every impossible moment is true. Documented, verified, witnessed by hundreds of people. This is not mythology. This is not legend. This is history. Now, before we begin, I want you to imagine something. Put yourself in the mind of a young soldier. 22 years old, fresh from training, eager to serve. You've been trained to never surrender. Surrender is shameful. Surrender is betrayal. Surrender is worse than death. You're told that the enemy will lie to you. They'll tell you the war is over. They'll show you newspapers announcing victory. They'll broadcast radio messages in your own language. They'll even dress up as your own officers and give you false orders. It's all propaganda, your instructors tell you. Enemy psychological warfare, designed to break your will. Trust nothing, trust no one, except your commanding officer. You're given a mission. Hold a position, disrupt the enemy, wait for reinforcements. "We will come for you," your commander says. "It may take months, it may take years, but we will come. Until then, you fight. You survive. You never give up." Now imagine your commanding officer never comes. Days pass, no reinforcements. Weeks pass, no supplies. Months pass, no communication. Years pass, nothing. But you remember your training. The enemy will try to trick you. So you keep fighting, because that's what a soldier does. Because that's what you were ordered to do. Because what if it's all a trick? What if the moment you surrender, your comrades launch their counterattack? What if you give up just one day before rescue arrives? How long would you keep fighting? 1 year? 2 years? 5? For most people, the answer would be measured in months. Maybe, if you were exceptionally stubborn, a few years. For Hiroo Onoda, the answer was 29 years, 10,950 days. Most of it completely. Our story begins not in the jungle, but in a small town in a Japan that no longer exists. March 19th, 1922. Kamikawa Village, Wakayama Prefecture, a rural area in southwestern Japan. Rice paddies, small farms, traditional wooden houses with sliding paper doors. This is where Hiroo Onoda was born. His father, Tanigoro Onoda, was a school teacher, respected in the community. Not wealthy but comfortable. His mother, Tame, ran the household with traditional discipline. She believed in education, in respect for authority, in duty above all else. Hiroo was the third of 4 children, an unremarkable boy in an unremarkable family in an unremarkable town. He went to school. He did his homework. He helped in his father's garden. He liked reading adventure stories. He liked hiking in the mountains near his home. He was normal. Nothing about his childhood suggested greatness. Nothing suggested that this quiet boy from a small town would become one of the most famous soldiers in history. But history has a way of finding people. In the 1930s, Japan was changing. The military was gaining power. Nationalism was rising. The country was preparing for war. Young Hiroo, like millions of other Japanese children, was taught that the emperor was divine, that Japan had a sacred destiny, that duty to country was the highest calling. He absorbed these lessons, believed them, internalized them. After finishing school, Onoda moved to China. He worked for a Japanese trading company, nothing glamorous, paperwork, logistics, the mundane work of commerce. But in 1942, when he was 20 years old, everything changed. The draft notice arrived. Japan was at war, with China, with Britain, with America, with half the world. They needed soldiers, millions of them. Hiroo Onoda reported for duty. He was assigned to the infantry, given a rifle, put through basic training. He was a good soldier, not the best, not the strongest or the fastest. But he was smart, and the army noticed. For 2 years, Onoda served as a regular infantryman. He was stationed in China. He saw combat. Not much, but enough. He saw men die, friends shot in front of him. He saw villages burn, civilians caught in crossfire. He learned what war really was. Not glorious, not heroic, survival. And he learned he was good at it. In May 1944, as the war was turning against Japan, Onoda received new orders. He was being transferred to the Nakano School. If you were a soldier in the Imperial Japanese Army and you received orders to report to Nakano, you knew 2 things. First, you had been selected for something special. Second, you probably weren't coming back. The Nakano School was not a normal military academy. It was located in Nakano, a quiet suburb of Tokyo, hidden in plain sight, unmarked buildings, no signs, no fanfare. The school trained special operatives, intelligence officers, saboteurs, guerrilla warfare specialists, men who would be inserted behind enemy lines and left there to operate independently for months or years. The training was intense. They learned how to gather intelligence, how to recruit informants, how to build spy networks. They learned sabotage, how to destroy bridges with minimal explosives, how to disable vehicles, how to poison water supplies. They learned survival, how to live off the land, how to treat wounds without medicine, how to purify water, how to navigate without maps or compasses. But most importantly, they learned psychology, the psychology of isolation, of paranoia, of resistance. You will be alone, the instructors told them, cut off from all support, surrounded by enemies, with no hope of rescue. The enemy will try to break you. They will offer you food, medicine, safety. All you have to do is surrender. But if you surrender, you betray everything, your emperor, your country, your comrades who died believing you would continue the fight. So you never surrender, never. Better to die than to give up. Day after day, week after week, the same message, over and over, never surrender. And there was more. The enemy will use propaganda, the instructors warned. They will drop leaflets telling you the war is over. They will broadcast radio messages claiming Japan has been defeated. They will even impersonate Japanese officers and try to give you false orders to surrender. It's all lies, all deception, enemy psychological warfare. Trust only your direct commanding officer. No one else, not even other Japanese soldiers unless they can prove their identity beyond any doubt. For 6 months, Onoda trained. He absorbed every lesson, memorized every technique, internalized every psychological defense. He became the perfect guerrilla soldier, smart enough to adapt, disciplined enough to endure, and most dangerously, ideologically committed enough to never question his orders. In December 1944, his training was complete. Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda was ready for his mission. He had no idea that his training had worked too well. December 1944. The war was lost. Japan didn't officially know it yet. But anyone paying attention could see the writing on the wall. The Americans had retaken island after island across the Pacific. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, the Philippines. Japanese forces were in retreat everywhere. Supply lines were cut. The Navy was decimated. The Air Force was running out of planes and pilots, but Japan would not surrender. Instead, they would fight to the last man. And if that wasn't enough, they would leave soldiers behind to continue the fight even after the main forces were gone. This was where Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda came in. On December 17, 1944, Onoda was summoned to meet his commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, a career military man. Weathered, battle-hardened. A man who had seen too much death to have any illusions about glory. They met in a small office in Tokyo. Taniguchi looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from knowing you're sending young men to die for a cause that's already lost. "Lieutenant Onoda," he said, "I have your assignment." He unrolled a map on the desk. Lubang Island, Western Philippines, about 75 miles southwest of Manila. His finger traced the small island on the map. It looked insignificant, tiny, just a speck in the ocean. 10 miles long, 5 miles wide. Population maybe 5,000 Filipinos in a few fishing villages. Strategically, it sits right in the shipping lanes. American supply convoys heading north to invade Luzon will pass right by it. If we can hold the island, we can harass those convoys. Slow their advance. Onoda studied the map. He could already see the problem. The island was small, indefensible against a serious assault. If the Americans wanted it, they would take it. Easily. "Sir," Onoda said carefully, "what are my orders?" Taniguchi looked at him for a long moment. "Your mission is guerrilla warfare. When the Americans invade, and they will invade, you are not to engage them directly. You're not to die heroically in some futile last stand. Instead, you disappear into the jungle. You conduct sabotage operations. You disrupt their logistics. You make the island too costly for them to hold. You survive. You endure. You continue the fight for as long as possible." Onoda nodded. He understood the tactical situation, but there was something else, something in Taniguchi's expression. "Sir," Onoda said, "how long do you expect this mission to last?" Taniguchi was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "It may take 3 years. It may take 5. The war situation is fluid. But whatever happens, we will come back for you. Japan will send reinforcements. We will retake the Philippines. And when we do, your guerrilla operations will be crucial to our success." It was a lie. Taniguchi knew it. Maybe, on some level, Onoda knew it too. But it didn't matter. Orders were orders. Then Taniguchi said something else, something that would haunt Onoda for decades. "Lieutenant, you are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. Do you understand? Under no circumstances are you to give up your life voluntarily. You may have to live on coconuts. If that's the case, live on coconuts. You may be alone. You may think all hope is lost. But you survive. You continue the mission. Until I or another authorized officer relieves you." Onoda stood at attention, his back straight, his eyes forward. "Yes, sir," he said. "I understand completely." And he did. He understood perfectly. He would follow these orders to the letter, no matter what. no matter how long. On December 26, 1944, Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda stepped off a small military transport boat onto the beach of Lubang Island. He had no idea that he wouldn't leave this island for 29 years. The island was beautiful, tropical, dense jungle covering most of the interior, white sand beaches along the coast, crystal clear water. It looked like paradise. But Onoda wasn't here for the scenery. He immediately began assessing the tactical situation. There was already a small Japanese garrison on the island. About 200 men. Poorly equipped. Low morale. They knew the war was going badly. The garrison commander, a weary major who'd been on the island for months, looked at Onoda with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "Intelligence officer, eh?" the major said. "Come to teach us guerrilla warfare?" There was bitterness in his voice. The garrison had been promised reinforcements, promised supplies, promised air support. Instead, they got one lieutenant. But Onoda got to work. He surveyed the island, mapped out defensive positions, identified potential ambush sites, located sources of food and water. He tried to train the garrison in guerrilla tactics, but most of them weren't interested. They were tired, homesick, ready to surrender. Onoda looked at them with contempt. They had given up before the fight even started. On February 28, 1945, everything changed. American forces landed on Lubang. It wasn't a massive invasion. The island wasn't important enough for that. Just a few hundred American soldiers supported by naval gunfire and airstrikes. More than enough. The Japanese garrison, outnumbered and outgunned, collapsed almost immediately. Some surrendered within hours. Others fled into the jungle and gave up within days. A few died fighting, but 4 men, 4 soldiers, followed their training. They retreated deep into the jungle. They hid, they waited. Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda, Private Yuichi Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, and Private First Class Kinshichi Kozuka. 4 men, 1 small island, 1 mission, survive. At first, it seemed manageable. They had their rifles, a small amount of ammunition, basic survival gear, and most importantly, their training. They moved constantly, never staying in one place more than 2 nights. They lived off the land, coconuts, bananas, wild fruit. Occasionally, they would raid a farm for rice. They avoided contact with everyone, the Americans hunting them, the local Filipino police, even other Japanese soldiers who they assumed had surrendered and might be collaborating with the enemy. At night, they would sit around small fires, hidden deep in the jungle, and talk about the mission. "How long do you think it will be?" Akatsu asked. "Before reinforcements arrive?" "Months," Onoda said confidently. "Maybe a year. Japan is preparing a counteroffensive. We just need to hold out." They all nodded. They wanted to believe it. Weeks passed. Then months. No reinforcements came, no supplies, no communication. But they had been trained for this. They knew the enemy would try to break their will, would make them think they were abandoned. So they kept fighting. In October 1945, something strange happened. A plane flew over the island. Low, circling slowly. And then, it dropped something. Leaflets. Hundreds of them. Fluttering down through the jungle canopy like snow. The 4 soldiers watched from hiding. Suspicious. Tense. After the plane left, Onoda carefully retrieved one of the leaflets. It was in Japanese, professionally printed. It showed a photograph of what appeared to be a Japanese surrender ceremony. The text read, "The war is over. Japan has surrendered to the Allied forces. Emperor Hirohito has ordered all Japanese military personnel to lay down their arms. You will be treated fairly as prisoners of war. Come out of hiding. The war is over." The 4 men stared at the leaflet. Then Onoda, slowly, carefully, tore it in half. "Propaganda," he said firmly. "Exactly what we were warned about." "Look at the paper quality," he continued. "American printing. This is psychological warfare. They're trying to trick us into surrendering." "But the photograph," Shimada said hesitantly. "It looks real." "Photography can be faked," Onoda said. "Remember your training. The enemy will use every trick. If Japan had really surrendered, our commanding officer would come tell us personally. The others nodded. It made sense. They burned the leaflet and continued fighting. More leaflets came. Over the following months, planes dropped thousands of them. Some showed photographs of destroyed Japanese cities. Some included personal messages from family members begging their sons to come home. Some were letters supposedly from former comrades describing how well they were being treated as prisoners. Onoda burned them all. Propaganda? All of it. In February 1946, exactly 1 year after the American invasion, something happened that shook them. They found a Japanese newspaper, left conspicuously on a jungle path, dated August 1945. The headline was massive: "Japan surrenders, war ends." The article described the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Soviet declaration of war, the Emperor's radio address, the surrender ceremony on the USS Missouri. It included photographs, detailed descriptions, names, dates. Private Akatsu picked it up, read it slowly. His hands were shaking. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, This is a real Japanese newspaper, from a major publisher. How could the Americans fake this?" Onoda examined it carefully. He had to admit, it looked authentic. But then he noticed something. "Look at how it's positioned," he said. "Right on the path. Like they wanted us to find it. If this were real, why would it be here? Why not delivered by a Japanese officer?" "The Americans must have printing presses," he continued. "They captured Japanese equipment. They could print anything. This is sophisticated propaganda, that's all." But doubt had been planted, especially in Akatsu's mind. Over the following weeks, the youngest soldier became increasingly withdrawn. He stopped talking much. He looked exhausted, haunted. One morning in September 1946, they woke up to find Akatsu gone. His rifle was there, his pack was there, but the man had vanished. They searched for him, called out quietly, looked for tracks. Nothing. "He deserted," Shimada said quietly. "He went to surrender." Onoda's jaw tightened. Anger flashed in his eyes. "Then he's a coward," Onoda said coldly. "He betrayed his oath. We're better off without him." But the truth was they were now down to 3 men. 3 soldiers on a small island, fighting a war that maybe no one else was fighting anymore. Years passed. 1947, 1948, 1949. Life in the jungle became routine. Wake before dawn. Move to a new location. Forage for food. Watch for enemies. Sleep lightly. Repeat. Every day. For years. They survived on coconuts and bananas. Occasionally, they would raid a farm at night, stealing rice or vegetables. Sometimes they would kill a cow for meat. The local Filipinos, terrified of these ghost soldiers, left offerings of food. Not out of kindness, but out of fear, hoping the Japanese soldiers would leave them alone. But Onoda interpreted this differently. "You see," he would say, "the locals are still supporting us. They know Japan hasn't been defeated. They're waiting for our forces to return." His ability to reinterpret reality, to make every piece of evidence fit his beliefs, was extraordinary. When they saw Filipino police searching for them, Onoda called them enemy collaborators. When they heard transistor radios playing modern music, Onoda said it was American propaganda broadcasts. When they saw new buildings and infrastructure, Onoda claimed it was the Americans fortifying their occupation. Everything could be explained within the framework of his beliefs. The war was still going on. Japan would return. They just had to keep fighting. In 1950, more leaflets appeared. But these were different. They were handwritten, personal letters, from family members. One was addressed to Onoda, from his brother. It described life in post-war Japan, how the country was rebuilding, how their parents were aging, how everyone hoped Hiroo was alive and would come home. The handwriting looked authentic. The details were specific, too specific to be faked. For a moment, just a moment, Onoda felt something. Doubt. What if? But then his training kicked in. His psychological defenses activated. The Americans could have captured my brother, he said, forced him to write this, or they could have forged his handwriting. This is exactly the kind of sophisticated psychological warfare we were warned about. He burned the letter. But that night, for the first time in years, Onoda couldn't sleep. In 1952, 7 years after the war ended, the Philippine government made a major effort to end the situation. They printed thousands of official surrender leaflets. They broadcast messages on radio. They even hired Japanese citizens, including former soldiers, to come to Lubang and call out to the holdouts. One day, the three men heard something that stopped them cold. A voice, speaking Japanese, with a perfect Tokyo accent. Lieutenant Onoda, Private Shimada, Private Kazuka, this is Major Tanaka of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. The war ended in 1945. You have been ordered to surrender. Come out. You will not be harmed. The three soldiers looked at each other. It could be real, Kazuka whispered. That sounded like a genuine Japanese officer. Onoda shook his head. How would a real Japanese officer know our names? He asked. Unless the Americans gave them to him. This is an impersonation, a trick. Remember, Major Taniguchi said he would come personally. He said he would relieve us, not some stranger. Until Taniguchi himself appears, we don't surrender. And so they stayed hidden. The search parties came and went. The loudspeaker announcements continued for weeks. But the three soldiers never revealed themselves. Eventually, the Philippine government gave up. The cost of the search operations was too high. And honestly, by 1952, most people assumed the holdouts were dead. But they weren't dead. They were ghosts, living shadows, moving through the jungle like phantoms. And occasionally they still struck. Small acts of sabotage. Burning a stockpile of rice, cutting telephone lines, stealing supplies. And sometimes when they felt threatened, they fought. Over the years, in various skirmishes and ambushes, Onoda and his men killed approximately 30 people. Farmers who got too close to their camps, police officers who were hunting them, fishermen who stumbled upon their hideouts. To Onoda, these were enemy casualties, legitimate acts of war. He felt no guilt. He was following orders. To the people of Lubang, they were murders. Innocent people killed by madmen who refused to accept reality. The truth was somewhere in between. May 7, 1954. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. The three men were checking one of their regular camps, looking for any signs that it had been discovered. They were moving through dense jungle. Shimada was in the lead, Onoda in the middle, Kazuka bringing up the rear. Suddenly, shots. A Philippine army patrol. They had been waiting in ambush. The jungle erupted in gunfire, bullets snapping through leaves, dirt exploding around their feet. Scatter! Onoda shouted. They ran, each in a different direction, standard guerrilla tactics, separate and regroup later. The firing continued for several minutes. Then, silence. Onoda lay flat in the underbrush, not moving, barely breathing. He waited an hour, 2 hours. Finally, when he was certain the soldiers had left, he moved to the prearranged rendezvous point. Kazuka was already there, unharmed, but his face was pale. They waited. All day, into the night. Shimada never came. The next morning, moving carefully through the jungle, they found him. Corporal Shoichi Shimada. Dead. Shot 3 times in the chest. The Philippine soldiers had left his body where it fell. As a warning. Or perhaps, as proof. Onoda and Kazuka stood over their comrade. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Kazuka said quietly, "We should bury him." Onoda shook his head. "No time," he said. "The soldiers might come back. We need to move." They took Shimada's rifle, his ammunition, his pack, everything useful. Then they left him there, in the jungle, alone. "He died well," Onoda said as they moved away. "He died fighting. That's what a soldier should do." But that night, in their new camp, Kazuka asked the question they'd both been thinking. "Lieutenant, how much longer? It's been 9 years. When will Japan send reinforcements?" Onoda looked into the darkness. "I don't know," he admitted. But our orders were clear. We fight until relieved, no matter how long it takes. But what if, Kazuka began, then stopped himself. What if what? Onoda asked sharply. Nothing, sir, Kazuka said quickly. Nothing. But the unspoken question hung in the air. What if the war really is over? Now there were two soldiers, alone on an island, fighting an invisible enemy, waiting for reinforcements that would never come. And the years kept passing. 1955, 1956, 1957. The world outside Lubang Island was changing rapidly. Japan had recovered from the war. The economy was booming. Cities were being rebuilt. A new generation was growing up that barely remembered the war. But on Lubang, time had stopped. Onoda and Kazuka lived like men from another century. Their uniforms were rags held together with plant fiber. Their boots had disintegrated years ago, replaced with sandals made from tree bark. Their rifles were still functional. Barely. They cleaned them obsessively, wrapped them in leaves to protect them from moisture, rationed their ammunition carefully. They had maybe 50 bullets left. Between them. After 15 years. Their daily routine never changed. Wake before dawn, check the perimeter, forage for food, move to a new location, conduct reconnaissance, return to camp, sleep, every day, for years, for decades. They rarely spoke anymore. Everything that needed to be said had been said. They communicated in gestures, in glances. Two men who had spent so long together, they could read each other's thoughts. But occasionally, usually at night, they would talk. About home, about family, about the Japan they remembered. My mother made the best miso soup, Kazuka said one night. I can still taste it. I remember cherry blossoms, Onoda replied. In spring. Walking under the trees with my brother. They were quiet for a moment. Do you think, Kazuka began, do you think they remember us? Our families? Of course, Onoda said firmly. When we return victorious, they'll be waiting. Heroes returning home. But his voice lacked conviction. The truth was even Onoda was starting to have doubts. Not about the war. He still believed Japan would return. He had to believe it. But sometimes, late at night, when exhaustion broke through his psychological defenses, a small voice in his mind would whisper, "What if you're wrong?" He would push the thought away, bury it, return to his certainty. But it was getting harder. In 1959, they saw something that disturbed them deeply. A group of Filipino workers building a new road through part of the island. Modern equipment, bulldozers, cement mixers, electric generators. The workers were laughing, joking, playing music on transistor radios. They didn't look occupied. They didn't look oppressed. They looked happy. American collaborators, Onoda muttered. Traitors working for the occupation forces. But Kazuka didn't respond. He just watched the workers, his expression uncertain. In 1960, 18 years after the war ended, the Japanese government made another attempt. They sent a delegation to Lubang, including Onoda's own brother, Tadao Onoda. For days, Tadao walked through the jungle calling out, "Hiroo! Brother, it's Tadao! The war is over, come home! Mother and father are waiting." Hidden in the jungle, less than 100 meters away, Onoda heard every word. He recognized the voice. It was his brother. No doubt about it. But that didn't matter. They got to him, Onoda whispered to Kazuka. The Americans must have captured him. Forced him to make these appeals. Or maybe they're threatening our family. But Lieutenant, Kazuka said hesitantly, that's really your brother. You can hear it in his voice. The emotion is real. Which is exactly why it's so convincing, Onoda replied. This is advanced psychological warfare. They're using my own family against me. They stayed hidden, silent, unmoving. After a week, Tadao gave up and left the island. That night, Kazuka spoke quietly. Lieutenant, I have to ask, what would it take? What evidence would you need to believe the war is over? Onoda thought for a long time. Major Taniguchi, he said finally. My commanding officer. He gave me the orders. Only he can relieve me of them. If he appears in person and orders me to surrender, then I'll believe it. And if he never comes? Kazuka asked softly. Then we keep fighting, Onoda said, until we die. Those were our orders. Kazuka nodded slowly. He didn't argue. What was the point? The 1960s arrived. Onoda was now in his 40s, 20 years on the island, 20 years of hiding, fighting, surviving. His hair was graying, his face deeply lined, his body lean and hard as wire. He looked like a wild man, like something from another age. The world outside had changed completely. Man had gone to space, the Beatles were famous, television was everywhere, Japan was hosting the Olympics. But on Lubang, it was still 1944. Occasionally, tourists would come to the island, Japanese visitors, curious about the ghost soldiers. Some thought it was just a legend. Others believed the soldiers were long dead. But the locals knew better. They saw signs, stolen food, cut telephone wires, footprints in the jungle, and occasionally someone would disappear. In 1965, a Filipino farmer was shot and killed. He had been working in his field near the edge of the jungle. 2 shots, from a vintage Japanese rifle. The police investigated, found shell casings. Arisaka Type 99, dated 1944. The ghost soldiers were still out there, still fighting their war. By 1970, Onoda and Kazuka had been on the island for 26 years. They were in their late 40s. Middle-aged men, living like animals, fighting a war that only existed in their minds. Their rifles were ancient. Their ammunition almost gone. Their uniforms were shreds of cloth. But they still followed their routine, still conducted patrols, still believed. And then, tragedy struck again. October 19th, 1972. Onoda and Kazuka were burning rice, a small act of sabotage, denying resources to the enemy. It was something they'd done hundreds of times before, routine, low risk. But this time, someone had seen the smoke. A Philippine army patrol, moving fast, weapons ready. The soldiers appeared suddenly. Too close, too fast. Freeze! Someone shouted in Tagalog. Onoda and Kazuka ran, splitting up, zigzagging through the jungle. Gunfire erupted. Automatic weapons, modern rifles, nothing like the old bolt-action rifles from World War II. The jungle exploded with noise. Bullets tearing through leaves, bark exploding from trees. Onoda dove behind a fallen log, rolled, came up running. Behind him, he heard a cry, not pain, surprise. Then, silence. Onoda kept running, following training, escape first, regroup later. He ran for an hour, changing direction constantly, doubling back, covering his tracks. Finally, when he was certain he wasn't being followed, he stopped and waited. At the rendezvous point, where they'd agreed to meet if they were ever separated. He waited all night. Kazuka never came. The next morning, moving carefully, Onoda returned to the site. The soldiers were gone, but they'd left something behind. A body. Private First Class Kinshichi Kazuka, age 51. Shot once. Through the heart. Onoda stood over his last companion, the man he'd lived with for 28 years. Longer than most marriages. Longer than most friendships. They'd shared everything. Food, danger, fear, hope, 28 years of survival. And now he was alone. For a long time, Onoda didn't move. He just stood there, looking down at his friend. No tears. He was beyond tears, beyond emotion. Just emptiness. He couldn't bury the body. The soldiers might return. He took Kazuka's rifle, his pack, his ammunition, 7 bullets left. That was all. He looked at his friend one last time. "You fought well," he said quietly. "You were a good soldier." Then he turned and walked back into the jungle, alone. For the first time in 28 years, Hiroo Onoda was completely alone. No comrades, no companions, no one to talk to, no one to share the burden with. Just him. The jungle. and his orders. Most men would have broken, would have given up, would have walked out of the jungle and surrendered. But Onoda was not most men. He continued the mission, alone, every day, the same routine. Patrol, forage, hide, survive. But now, there was no one to talk to, no one to share the watch, no one to confirm his beliefs. He talked to himself, out loud, just to hear a human voice. Patrol Sector 3 today, he would say to the empty jungle. Check the rice stores. Monitor enemy movements. At night, he would sit alone by his tiny fire and recite his orders. Continue the mission. Disrupt the enemy. Wait for reinforcements. Never surrender. Never give up. Over and over. Like a prayer. Like a mantra. The only thing keeping him sane was structure, routine, discipline. He still shaved, using a knife blade and water every 3 days. He still maintained his rifle, cleaning it daily. Even though he only had 7 bullets left, he still conducted reconnaissance, mapping enemy positions. Even though there was no one to report to, he still believed. Because belief was all he had left. News of Kazuka's death spread quickly. It made international headlines. Japanese soldier killed on Philippine Island, had been fighting for 27 years. People were shocked, amazed, horrified. How was it possible? How could someone not know the war was over? For 27 years? The Japanese government was embarrassed. This was a national shame. They had to end this. They organized another search, dropped more leaflets, broadcast more messages. But Onoda had heard it all before. For 28 years. He ignored everything. And then, something unexpected happened. A young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki read about Onoda in the newspapers. Suzuki was 24 years old, a college dropout, a wanderer. He lived for adventure. He had a dream. To find 3 things: Lieutenant Onoda, the abominable snowman, and a panda. In that order. Most people thought he was crazy, but Suzuki was serious. In February 1974, he traveled to Lubang Island, alone, with just a backpack and a camera. He had no military training, no survival skills, just enthusiasm and incredible luck. For days, he wandered through the jungle, calling out, "Lieutenant Onoda, my name is Suzuki. I'm Japanese. I'm here to talk. I'm not your enemy." Most search parties gave up after a few days, but Suzuki kept going, week after week. And then, on March 10, 1974, he found him. Or rather, Onoda found him. Suzuki was sitting by his camp, eating rice, completely unaware. And suddenly, there was a man, standing at the edge of the clearing, rifle pointed, eyes cold. Suzuki froze. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Suzuki, slowly, carefully, raised his hands. "Lieutenant Onoda," he said quietly. "Is that you?" The man didn't respond. Just watched. Evaluating. "My name is Norio Suzuki," the young man continued. "I'm Japanese. From Tokyo. I came here to find you." "Why?" The soldier's voice was rough, suspicious. Because everyone in Japan knows your story. You're famous. A legend." "Famous?" Onoda said. "For what?" "For never giving up," Suzuki said. "For staying loyal to your orders. For still fighting." Slowly, Onoda lowered the rifle, just slightly. "The war," he said. "How is it going? When will reinforcements arrive?" And that's when Suzuki realized. This man genuinely didn't know. "Lieutenant," Suzuki said carefully, "the war is over. It ended in 1945, almost 30 years ago." Onoda stared at him. His expression didn't change. "Prove it," he said. I can show you newspapers," Suzuki said. "Photographs. I have a camera. I can show you modern Japan." "Propaganda," Onoda said. "I've seen it all before. The enemy has shown me newspapers, leaflets, even sent people claiming to be my family. All lies." Suzuki felt a chill. This man was absolutely convinced. 30 years of certainty. How could you break through that? What would convince you? Suzuki asked. What evidence would you need? Onoda thought for a moment. My commanding officer, he said. Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. He gave me my orders. Only he can relieve me of them. Bring him here. Let him order me to surrender. Then, I'll believe you. I'll try, Suzuki said. I promise. I'll go back to Japan. I'll find your commanding officer, and I'll bring him here. Onoda studied the young man, looking for deception, for tricks. But Suzuki's eyes were honest, earnest. He genuinely wanted to help. You have 1 month, Onoda said. If you're telling the truth, bring my commander here. If you don't return, I'll know you were lying. I'll return, Suzuki said. I promise. They talked for several hours. Suzuki asked about life in the jungle. Onoda asked about Japan, about the war, about whether the emperor was still alive. Suzuki even took photographs. Onoda posing with his rifle, his face weathered but proud, a soldier still on duty. Then Suzuki left, walking back through the jungle, carrying the most important mission of his life. He had to find Major Taniguchi. Back in Japan, Suzuki's photographs caused a sensation. The ghost soldier was real. He was alive, and he was willing to surrender if his commander ordered it. The problem was Major Taniguchi was now 74 years old, long retired, living quietly in a small town. When Suzuki found him and explained the situation, the old officer was stunned. Onoda? He said. Lieutenant Onoda is still there? Still following his orders? Yes, sir, Suzuki said. He's waiting for you. He won't surrender to anyone else. Taniguchi was quiet for a long time, remembering the young lieutenant he'd sent to Lubang 30 years ago. He'd never expected this. I'll go, he said finally. I owe him that much. March 9th, 1974. Major Taniguchi, now a frail old man, returned to Lubang Island. With him came Japanese officials, Philippine officials, journalists, photographers. The world was watching. They went to the place where Suzuki had met Onoda, and they waited. For hours, nothing. Then, as the sun began to set, a figure emerged from the jungle. Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda, 52 years old, wearing the tattered remains of his uniform, rifle in hand, standing at attention. He looked like a ghost, like something from another world. His eyes were hard, suspicious, searching for tricks. Taniguchi stepped forward. The two men looked at each other. 30 years compressed into a single moment. Lieutenant Onoda, Taniguchi said. His voice was formal, military. I am Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. Do you recognize me? Onoda studied him. The face was older, much older. But the eyes, he recognized the eyes. Yes, sir, Onoda said. I recognize you. Lieutenant, Taniguchi said. I am here to relieve you of your duties. The war ended on August 15, 1945. Japan surrendered to the Allied forces. The Emperor himself ordered all military personnel to lay down their arms. Your mission is complete. You have served with honor, with extraordinary dedication. But now, I order you to surrender your weapon and return home. For a long moment, Onoda didn't move. 30 years, 10,950 days. All based on one belief, one certainty. And now, that certainty was being taken away. Slowly, very slowly, Onoda unslung his rifle. He held it for a moment. This rifle, his companion for 3 decades, 500 rounds fired, cleaned every day, maintained perfectly. He looked at it, then at Taniguchi. And then, he handed it over. The surrender was complete. The photographs of that moment spread around the world. Lieutenant Onoda, standing at attention, handing over his rifle, the last soldier of World War II finally coming home. He was flown back to Japan, treated like a hero. Crowds lined the streets, people waved flags, children cheered. But Onoda felt like a stranger in his own country. The Japan he remembered didn't exist anymore. Everything had changed. The buildings, the people, the culture. He'd left a nation at war. He returned to a nation at peace. Modern, prosperous, unrecognizable. His parents were alive. Elderly, but alive. They wept when they saw him. 30 years thinking their son was dead. His brother Tadao, who had gone to Lubang years before, welcomed him home. But there was sadness too. Many of his childhood friends had died. The girl he'd known before the war had married someone else, had grandchildren now. Time had moved on, without him. There were questions, difficult questions, about the 30 people killed on Lubang, farmers, police officers, innocent people. The Philippine government wanted justice. Some wanted Onoda prosecuted for murder. But President Ferdinand Marcos, in an act of extraordinary grace, granted him a full pardon. He was a soldier, Marcos said, following orders. However misguided, he believed he was doing his duty. Let him go home in peace. Onoda tried to adjust. He wrote a book about his experiences. He gave speeches. He became famous worldwide. But he never truly fit in, not in modern Japan. The country had moved on, but he was still that 22-year-old lieutenant, following orders, believing in duty above all else. Eventually, he moved to Brazil, bought a ranch, raised cattle, found some peace in the solitude. He married, had no children, lived a quiet life. In later years, he returned to Lubang Island several times, to honor his fallen comrades, to meet with the families of those he'd killed, to seek some kind of closure. He donated money to the island, helped build schools, tried, in some small way, to make amends. Hiroo Onoda died on January 16, 2014, in Tokyo, at the age of 91, 40 years after finally coming home. His story raises profound questions about loyalty, about duty, about belief, about the power and the danger of absolute certainty. Was he a hero, a fanatic, a victim of propaganda? Perhaps he was all three. He was a man who followed orders, who never questioned, who believed so completely that he couldn't see the truth even when it was right in front of him. He was trained too well. The psychological conditioning at Nakano School worked exactly as intended. Perhaps too well. He survived for 30 years. Not because of luck, not because of skill, but because he believed. And that belief gave him strength, but it also imprisoned him. In the end, Hiroo Onoda was the last soldier of World War II, a man out of time, a warrior without a war, a believer without a cause. His story reminds us that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let go, to question what we believe, to admit we might be wrong. For 29 years, Hiroo Onoda fought a war that was already over. For 29 years, he waited for orders that would never come. For 29 years, he remained loyal to a mission that no longer existed. He was the last soldier, and his war, finally, was over.